Well, first will you just say your name?
William Platts.
When were you born, Bill?
1928.
Okay.
Next month I'll be 94.
Wow. What's your birthday? April?
April 18.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I still run track and field.
I read about you in the newspaper.
Yeah, I hold 5 world records.
Yeah.
Track and field.
That's amazing.
And that keeps me in shape to hit the high mountain lakes.
So are you still competing in the track?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Last year I went back to the USA National Championships at Iowa State University.
Wow.
And I was a national champion in 7 events. And the 8th event was the pentathlon, which that's the only reason I went back, was to set a world record in the pentathlon.
Wow.
Because a guy from Czechoslovakia has it.
Wow.
And it's a 5-event deal, so I got through the first 4, and now I got enough points to break the world record. And then the official said, "We're a little behind. We're going to run the 1500 at 11:30." So I said, "Okay," and everybody kind of disappeared, and I went over to watch the javelin people and kept watching my walk and went over, and they were running the 1500. And I went up to the official and I said, "Hey, you're almost an hour early." And he said, "We run this on Iowa time, not Idaho time." And I forgot to set my watch
Oh no!
So I lost the world record.
Oh no!
Oh, gee.
Where were you born?
Magic Valley at, well, I was born up on Black Pine Mountain. Do you know where that is?
Mm-mm.
You know where Malda is?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's that big mountain, Sublet, and then Black Pine.
Okay.
My dad had a sheep ranch at the base of 8 Mile.
Okay.
He had the 8 Mile Ranch.
Okay.
Sheep ranch. So.
Wow. Were you born in a hospital? Were you born at home?
Well, they run me into, from what they tell me, they run me into a hospital and took me back.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, 4 of them.
Okay. Were you the oldest or youngest? Or
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. Talk a little, if you want, about your mom and dad. And you said your dad had a sheep farm.
Yeah, my dad had a sheep ranch, and then he sold it.
Okay.
Just as the Depression hit.
Mm.
And he bought a big car dealership, one in Burley,
Okay.
and a couple of farms, and when the Depression hit, he lost it all. So we moved over to Paul,
Okay.
and he managed to make a living there with a garage and a service station.
Okay.
But the Depression hit him really hard, because it really, just took everything him and his dad had worked for years. So still, for us kids, it was a great time.
Yeah.
It was during the Great Depression that we started hitting the Sawtooth Valley.
Okay. And would you go on vacation up there, or what was your...
Yeah, we would, well, when we were kids, what got me going in the Sawtooth Valley was some of the old farmers around there always went on their big salmon trips steadily. I mean, it was a meat deal. Boy, you could bring a lot of fish back. And so they would take a couple of us kids, and our job was to, and believe it or not, and the first time we went up, they used pitchforks. Yeah, I don't think I was there in 39. I think 40 was the first year. I'm basing this on what I saw at Sunbeam Dam in 1940.
Okay, because it had been blown up.
Yeah, they'd just blown
right?
the dam up, and I can remember what it looked like just after they blew it up. But anyway, they would take us up, and our job was to go through the pools and the underbanks, and we'd just go in with our bib overalls on, and we'd be in there, and we would chase the salmon over the riffles, and then they would get them.
Wow.
And then when we got a load, we'd head home, because we didn't have coolers or ice in those days. But
Right.
they might grab us, and we'd get up there in the late afternoon, and they'd get a load of salmon. We'd head for home. Then while we were up there, we run into 2 guys who had been to a high mountain lake, and it was Alpine Lake.
Okay.
And so, I don't know, 41, 42, I started hitting alpine in those lakes in the Alpine Basin. Got hooked on high mountain lakes. So we would go up and hit the high mountain lakes, and then we'd get some salmon to take home. Yeah, one time we even rode our bikes to redfish all the way from Paul. We'd put an army blanket, tie it to our bike, and we'd live off the land.
Wow.
We'd go up a month at a time. We didn't have any money in those days. I remember Baby Ruth and Butterfinger was 2.5 cents, and we didn't have enough money to buy one. We'd go down to the Sunny Gulch Sheep Bridge. You remember who that was? I think it washed out.
Okay.
Recreation in those days was different. Of course, this was just the starting of the war.
Mm.
You know, 40, 41, I think 41 we finally got into it, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go down to the Sunny Gulch Sheep Bridge, and you could stand on the bridge and you could watch the salmon coming up. And in the 40s, in the 50s we had a lot of salmon, but not like we did in the 40s. For some reason during the war years, tremendous runs come in, even though the commercials were taking 80% of them, probably over 80%. It showed you the tremendous number that were coming up the system at that time. And we'd watch these salmon, and if they went to the right, we'd let them go, and if they went to the left, we could get them because it was shallow. Okay. And then there was an island down below, the same thing, only it was reversed. The right-hand side was shallow, and the left hand was deep.
Yeah.
And if sockeye come through, we never bothered them because they come through like antelope. Chinook lollygagged around.
Okay.
And in those days, sockeye was kind of a trash fish. You know, nobody wanted them. We couldn't trade a sockeye for food because they didn't look good. But a silver Chinook, we could get a lot of pork and beans and soup and that kind of stuff out of a salmon. But so we lived pretty good up there.
Were you with your brothers and sisters or friends? I
did later on, but at that time it was just two of us. We could get to peekaboo the first night. What we did is, instead of going around through Shoshone, make the big circle, we'd cut straight across the desert. There's kind of a wagon road that went out to Kamima.
Okay,
yeah. Then it went out, and then it skirted a lobe of the craters of the moon, and we cut through the craters and come into the highway. And we could get to peekaboo. It'd be dark, and then we'd sleep in a haystack at peekaboo. Ate breakfast in a potato field the next morning because we didn't have any money. There was at that time, there were tremendous jackrabbit populations in Magic Valley. I shudder at what we did because it was so terrible, but I went on many rabbit drives, but I remember one of them, we got over 6,000 jackrabbits in an hour and a half. Mink farm was buying them for 10 cents a piece, and they fed them back to the mink in those days. And at the same time, we had massive snowshoe populations, especially on Galena Summit and the Big Woods side and over and around Stanley Lake. You really don't see those. And the pika have disappeared in the Sawtooths.
Yeah.
Boy, the white clouds was pika heaven in those. When I did the white cloud studies, I've been to every lake in the White Clouds, 120 of them. I got them all documented, wrote reports on them. Been every lake in the Pioneers, every lake in the Boulders, and I haven't been to every lake in the Sawtooths because there's too many of them. Yeah. But I got to a lot of them.
I bet.
Yeah. So anyway, there were snowshoes all the way through that country, especially there's quite a few around Stanley Lake. We camped at Stanley Lake sometimes. Okay. To get into Sawtooth Lake and Barren Lakes and those over there.
Yep. Yeah.
And we finally got a Model A, an old used Model A.
Okay.
Once we got transportation, then we could come up anytime we wanted.
Yeah.
And we'd spend a lot of the summer up there. We'd go home in Thin Peaks. As soon as we got enough money for gas, we'd head. Because down there, you're living in that dry, dusty sagebrush, and the Sawtooth Valley was utopia to us. I mean, it was, every time we got enough money, we'd head for and especially when the salmon season on, because, especially during the war years, there wasn't any money. So it was hard work getting enough to buy a few gallons of gas, but then you had to have a stamp. Yeah, every 2 weeks you got a stamp for, I think, 4 gallons or something like that. So we would have to, sometimes if we had the money, there were some people in town would get the stamps, but they never drove, so we'd talk them out of a stamp or two. And you get enough stamps to get enough gas to get up there and back. Okay. But gas was only 19 cents a gallon at that time. Yeah. So, which was a lot of money then. Yeah. So every time we got enough money, we'd head for the Sawtooth Valley. Nice. And then the salmon run, we always figured you made money when you went up because you could bring a load of salmon back.
Mm-hmm. And where would you said you would trade the salmon for pork or beans, where would you do that?
Redfish,
Okay.
in those days it was different. There wasn't a lot of recreation years because we camped right on the beach.
Mm.
Well, we only had a little blanket, so the sand was soft.
Mm-hmm.
And the first hour and a half to 2 hours it was warm.
Yeah.
After that it got cold. But so that's the only camp there, and I think it was a halfway spot between Magic Valley, Boise, and Salmon and that country because the camping would kind of build up in the evening, and then everybody'd leave in the morning.
Okay.
And there wasn't many. There were not many people came that stayed 4, 5, 6 days, 7 days.
Right.
So we would wait for a salmon to be traded. It had to look really silvery.
Yeah.
You know, they turned kind of dark after you got them out for a while.
Uh-huh.
So we'd wait till about noon, and then we'd go down to Sunny Gulch Sheep Ridge and grab one and bring it back. And then when everybody was around the camp that evening, then we'd go around the camp seeing who looked interested and maybe get 2 camps bidding on it. And
Yeah.
we lived pretty good at that time.
What was Galena Pass like?
Oh, we were scared of Galena.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we pushed up, and we almost had to push down too because the road was soft. See, the asphalt ended just north of Ketchum,
Okay.
so it's all sand and a little gravel going over Galena. And we figured it took about 5 to 8 gallons of water to get over Galena because the Model A's had little radiators, and it'd take about 3 fill-ups to get to the top of Galena.
Wow.
And then the first few times I went to Galena scared me to death because the road went right down Camp Creek.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that was brutal.
Yeah.
And then when we got to the bottom, there was a big line there was a remnant population of big lodgepole. And the old man told me that even before Camp Creek, the road really went down steeper. And they said people would cut a lodgepole, put it behind their car to come down that hill, and then when they got down, they'd release the pole. And some of the remnants of the pole were still there.
Wow.
That was that'd be about 1940.
Wow.
And then in the mid-1950s, they built the new road and it went clear out to the northeast and come back and come around. But then it wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More gradual.
Yeah. And because you not only had to fill water cans up to get over it, when it come right up the draw, you had to fill water cans to come back. But then when they built that big long road going out, then from then on you could make it maybe one trip without. But you'd be going pretty soon. You'd have water, it'd be a geyser out in front of you.
Wow.
We'd try and stop before then. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you had to keep the motors running to put the cold water in so you didn't split the blocks. So it was quite a job getting over Galena.
Yeah. You went to college and studied fisheries, right?
Yeah, I got a BS at Idaho State University in conservation education, and a master's at Utah State University in wildlife, and then I got a PhD in fisheries, and I majored in fluvial geomorphology. So that's the reason I got into hydro and salmon and steel lead. And then pretty soon they were paying me to go to high mountain lakes and the Sawtooths
Perfect.
and the White Clouds.
Perfect. Well, I'd love to hear your stories about the White Clouds. I know, didn't you name some of the lakes?
Yeah, I named a lot of the lakes in the White Clouds, probably over half, maybe, because only the lower lakes are named at that time.
Right.
And if you look, I tried to name each lake based on the geologic setting, geomorphic setting. If you look at those lakes in there, each one, if you go in there, you'll see it with a setting that kind of tipped it off.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to do it in those days, and probably still. there was criteria. Can't be named after anybody who's still alive, and has to fit the situation, and can't have any swear words in it. So I went through the protocol with the USGS on how to do it. And then when I got through it, then I filled all these sheets out, because I figured these lakes in the White Clouds are so beautiful.
Yeah.
That to call one number 12 was, to me, was just, I couldn't be it. So I sent them all in, and then it had to go out for review. And the only bad review I got out was from Idaho Fish and Game, because they said if we change the names, they're going to have to change all their hatchery records.
Oh.
But USGS overruled them.
Do you remember about what year that was that you were naming them?
I'm guessing it's late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
So what I did, because I had all the background and all the data, I swept the state from Weiser to Idaho Falls, giving presentations against. We had to do that. We would have lost the White Clouds. That mining venture was so big, and the settling ponds were so massive. The beautiful Boulder Creek Meadows was going to be their big settling pond, you know. It would have decimated the East Fork. It could have really made, it could have really hurt the salmon run coming in. To me, that's the #1 battle that's been won environmentally in Idaho.
So was that your presentations that you would give? Was it mostly about how this would affect the salmon?
Yeah, what I did is I took them through the blackbird situation and the Silver King and, what was the other one? And showed them this is what's happening. The blackbird mine alone, and then the one up above too, completely eliminated the salmon run, steelhead run, and the bull trout in Panther Creek. I mean, just wiped them right out for years and decades. And so, and that was small compared to what we're going to have in the White Clouds. So I showed them that if this comes in, it's guaranteed to knock out the East Fork of the salmon. Well, then the mining company got on me really bad. Anyway, we won out, and a lot of that too was due to Cecil Andrus. You know, it's really interesting because of the bedrock situation and the height and elevation. The lakes in the Sawtooths are really different than the lakes in the White Clouds. And the lakes in the Pioneers are different, and the lakes in the Boulders, they don't even hardly resemble each other.
Yeah.
But to me, the lakes in the White Clouds are very gentle lakes, open, have a lot of good soil around them. In the Sawtooths, they're more rugged, bouldery, and I really fell in love with the White Cloud lakes. Spent a lot of time in there. Shame we don't have big salmon runs now, because the salmon spawning potential in the Sawtooth Valley is many times better now than it was historically.
Why is that?
Many times. Well, because of diversions.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there was a big diversion right there, kind of where Pettit comes in. A big, massive diversion. When they put that diversion in, it was total. It dried it up.
Wow.
And then there was another diversion down at 4th of July. It pretty well dried the river up.
Okay.
And then Pole Creek was diverted. And then there was an intermediate diversion, and I'm not sure where that was, but we had 2 of them. After the 4th of July, we kept checking these diversions, because the minute they blocked the water off, it would be full of salmon, and you could just go down and pick them up. And they were going to die anyway, so we'd load up with salmon below those diversions and take them home.
Yeah.
And you just go back there in pools, or backs are out of the water, and you could just pick them up and take them home then.
Wow.
And they were good fish because they're just new into the system.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a shame too, and that's what really limited sockeye. Alturas, I think, was a better sockeye fishery than redfish. It was more productive, and I think in pre-diversion times that you know, we had sockeye and Stanley, redfish, Pettit, and Alturas. That's what you read the records.
Yeah.
What they also forgot that we also had some sockeye and Perkins and little redfish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, actually they used those two lakes to a much smaller extent.
Yeah.
But then, because sockeye, the first time I ever saw sockeye, I think, was around the 15th of July. They come in a little late
Yeah.
and fast. Boy, they come in like antelope.
Uh-huh.
It was all business with sockeye. They didn't lollygag like Chinook.
Right.
And they come through so fast. But the diversions went in before the sockeye hit. Right after the 4th of July, the diversions would start taking effect. By the 15th, usually they had the river completely dry. So that eliminated all the sockeye above Redfish Lake.
Right.
And if sockeye, if the 4 dams were taken out on the lower Snake, which was, I was really pushing for the salmon people in these videos. We could get sockeye back again into Alturas and Pettit.
Yeah.
And Perkins. Even Perkins had some sockeye in historically. At the Sheep Bridge, when sockeye come around the bend, they were by us.
Yeah.
Boy, they were just like bullets.
Yeah.
And when they hit the mouth of Redfish Lake Creek, the next morning they were in the lake. It was just, or in Little Redfish Lake. It was just, they were quite a fish.
Yeah.
But I was surprised that people did not like them in those days. Fish and Game purposely eradicated sockeye salmon and then put up barriers so they couldn't get reestablished. Well, and the thing that really saved us, and this gets us back to Sunbeam Dam, is that even when Sunbeam Dam was in place and water going over the top of it, there was still some sockeye coming back to the dam because the kokanee themselves can bring sockeye back. It's small, but it's very valuable.
Right.
And that's it. Chinook will go extinct eventually in the Salmon River drainage. But as long as we've got kokanee, we need to really take care of the kokanee population in Alturas and redfish and get them going in the others too. Because we can always bring sockeye back as long as we got kokanee.
Yeah, their genetic material. Let's talk more about Sunbeam. And so you think you first saw Sunbeam in about 1930?
I'm guessing 40 because I didn't see Sunbeam before it was blown out. So I'm guessing around 1940. And, you know, they'd blown a hole in it in 34, but it was a it was a chute.
Okay.
Yeah, the fish just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And then in about 1939, Fish and Game come up with $750, which was a mistake. They should have come up with a couple thousand because they blew a little piece of it out. But even in 40 and 41 and 42, fish had a hard time getting by Sunbeam because it looked like Dagger Falls.
Oh, wow.
When they blew it up, all the material fell down in the channel. And it was quite a rapid to begin with.
Yeah.
And at that, you know, if you remember how Sunbeam Dam went over, it developed a tremendous plunge pool below it. And in the first year, Sunbeam was a tremendous salmon fishery because the heavy sediments hadn't filled the plunge pool up yet. So they'd work their way out on the dam and down on the rocky cliffs. And then some people would come across below and they'd come up and fish the other side. There was really a nice bench on the other side. So there were two big pools then. And these pools have got filled up now. But they blew out the wrong side of the dam. The river does not want to go that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it turned into a big sediment producer. It still is today. It's still producing a lot of sediment that shouldn't be going downriver.
Right.
The Salmon River built a really nice meander that went to grade. But I think they blew that side out because at that time maybe still some of the hydro facilities were still in on the other side. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know why they would pick that side, but what they did now is they forced the river to try and build a back oxbow.
Right.
To stay in grade. So what it's doing is the number of the footage in here on the curve, the river now is taking out the mountain to build a curve of equal distance because it has to go to grade. All rivers go to grade.
Yeah.
And if you look at the mouth of the Yankee Fork, you'll see that it's still fighting grade because its grade is higher than the Yankee Fork.
Oh.
And rivers don't work that way.
Right.
The Yankee Fork has to grade to the salmon, not the salmon to the Yankee
Right.
Fork.
Yeah.
So.
Huh.
And so Sunbeam, and you know, when I look back at Sunbeam, you know, almost, well, over 100 years ago, you wonder what the mindset was, because they didn't think nothing of knocking out that tremendous salmon steelhead sockeye run
Right.
with a dam for a mine that was losing money and lost stockholders a lot of money
Yeah.
and only operated 1 year. But what would that be? But 20 some years later, the dam is still blocking salmon.
Right.
So 20 years in there with nothing going on,
Yeah.
they let the salmon run go to pieces. And I think their mindset was kind of bad. And then I suddenly realized, you know, our mindset today is still as much greed in as that, because we're willing to knock out the whole salmon steelhead sockeye run in the Snake River system for 4 dams, 4
Right.
little dams where you get the power from somewhere else. And it just doesn't, so I'm thinking, you know, 50 years from now they're going to look back at us and wonder, what in the devil were those people thinking about? When Sunbeam was in those first few years during the war years, when salmon are having such a hard time getting past Sunbeam, the Yankee Fork was tremendous. It was the Yankee Fork was black with salmon in those days.
When did the Yankee Fork start getting dredged? I don't remember.
It was dredged about 1940 to 1942, and then the war years shut it down because they couldn't get gas. So from 42 to 46, sometimes we'd see the Yankee Fork clear, and so then in 46, 47, after the war, and they could get gas again and oil and fuel, they started it back up, and then they dredged 5 or 6 miles of it, and then the one dredge shut down, and then Simplot come in with the dredge that's there now.
Right.
And he took about another mile of it, and then till he run to his property line. So the Yankee Fork was running muddy even in 52 and 53. It makes you wonder, because the dredging really didn't get that much gold. It took more. It's taken more money to rehabilitate by far Yankee Fork than the miners got out of it, and that's pretty typical. When it comes to hard rock mining, it's awful hard to make more money than it's going to take to put it back together.
Salmon in the Sawtooth Valley, like, when did you start noticing their numbers? You know, you used to be able to stand on that sheep bridge and see them coming up, and when did you start noticing their numbers declining?
Numbers were pretty good until about 1958, 59. And then they really started plummeting, and but because at that time they only had 4 dams to go over.
Right.
And then when Lower Monumental and Ice Harbor first, Ice Harbor wasn't so bad. Lower Monumental was a bad one. When those 4 started coming in the 60s and 70s, actually there was still some salmon there in the early 80s, and then they really started plummeting. Sockeye really started going to pieces. 80s, 90s, in the 2000, 2010. Like last year, I think was the lowest number of steelhead we've ever had come back to Idaho.
Yeah.
And I keep telling people, I don't think too many believe me, but the perfect storm is coming. You know, the smolt to adult return is so critical in keeping a population going, and it's down to where they're not replacing themselves. And all we got to do is get a big drought or big to go back into a Great Recession or Great Depression or something like that, where there's no money. So, and the ocean's getting warm. I mean, a perfect storm's coming when the salmon and steelhead just aren't going to make it into Idaho.
Let's talk about Stanley a little bit more. The Stanley bathhouse.
Oh boy, yeah.
What was that?
Oh, you know, we would ride our bikes all the way every night. We just loved the bathhouse. It was really something.
Uh-huh.
And it was right alongside the road.
Okay.
And where they got the hot water, there must have been a hot water spring right in there somewhere that they got it.
Yeah. Was it on Valley Creek?
Yeah.
The bathhouse? Okay, yeah.
But it was up on the kind of the plateau.
Okay.
I don't know how they got the water in there. Well, we didn't pay attention
Right.
to that. But it was a nice building, all walled in, had dressing rooms, had benches you could sit on, and then it had this concrete pool, had steps going down into it, and there was always soap available, and it was a community bathhouse for Stanley. And you'd wait, and you had a flashlight or a lantern or something. And if there was a light in there, then you just sit out and waited your turn. You know, after you're messing with salmon and laying in the sand and hitting high mountain lakes, that was kind of a highlight of the trip a lot, was going to that bathhouse.
Yeah.
But then the BLM, I think, took it out.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know why they took it out, because it was, the whole town of Stanley used it.
Yeah.
I don't imagine there were too many showers or bathtubs in Stanley at that time.
Right. That's good. Were there any other hot springs that you would visit? I know.
There was one down by Sunbeam,
Okay. Yeah.
but it was pretty crude.
You mentioned, I think, the Sawtooth mountain slide or earthquake.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, the Sawtooth Fault, nobody knew we had one in those days. The Sawtooth Fault, really the epicenter's over there near Dagger. You see, we had the old Model A, and 4 of us kids were camped at Stanley Lake. Out of the middle of the night, about 1 or 2 or 3, this kind of shaking started, and all of a sudden, a tremendous roar up the canyon from us, and we couldn't figure out what it was. So we all jumped up out of our sleeping bags, wondering which way to run. And it was pitch dark, and we didn't know what to do, so we just stayed and kept watching, you know. Up the canyon, you couldn't see much. And then all of a sudden, the whole canyon was filled with dust. And we were breathing dust. And then it was all over. So the next morning we got up and started working our way into Sawtooth Lake. And when we got up, a big V had come off of the side of the mountain, part of it. And it had come down and come across Sawtooth, the creek coming out of Sawtooth Lake. And well, it must have covered 300-400 yards. So if you'd been camped in there, you'd have been dead.
Yeah. That was in the 40s, probably?
Yeah, that'd be probably 42, 43.
Did you ever encounter or see any, like, wolves or mountain lions or bears or anything back there when you were...
We saw bears quite a bit, especially going into Dagger. When we'd get up and go into Dagger Falls and come out, we'd usually see a bear or two. But I saw very few around redfish. At Alpine once, when we was climbing snowy sides, I saw a cougar run across a meadow. But I don't remember, my whole life I've lived in the backcountry, and I've only seen 7 cougars.
Wow.
Yeah, and but I don't remember, that's the only cougar I can remember seeing. We see their tracks, but I never did see them. That's the only one I remember seeing. And we thought we saw a wolf one time. I'm trying to remember where that was, and I reported it to Fish and Game that we thought it was a wolf. Run across a moraine, but it could have been a coyote. But we thought it was a wolf. You know, us kids thought it was a wolf.
Yeah.
But it may have been a coyote, or it couldn't have been a fox, because we would have known the tail on that.
Right.
So that's the closest I come to seeing a wolf. I don't think there were hardly any in there at that time.
Yeah. No.
And I don't think there were many cougars in there at that time either.
Yeah. There's
And hardly any elk, but a lot of deer.
in the 40s and 50s, or any time. Do you remember a big tribal presence? Were you running into like Nez Perce or Shoshone-Bannock or anything?
Hardly ever.
Yeah.
See, in those days, they had to abide by the same regulations we did. We did find arrowheads and stuff in there. The first time I saw Indians was later on, and that was in the South Fork of the Salmon. The Nez Perce were coming in there. But you know, going back 20 to 30,000 years ago, when the first natives really come in, the first Native Americans come in to the Sawtooth Valley, they must have thought they found utopia, because boy, they suddenly come in where they could, in one day they could get enough fish to last them the whole year. Yeah. But then they put, when they eradicated, they put, they didn't want sockeye coming back into Stanley, or they didn't want them into Alturas or anywhere, so they put those diversions in so they couldn't come back. Yellow belly. Yeah. And they're still there today.
Yeah. Why did they do that initially?
I think they were, you know, that's about the time I come on with Fish and Game. Well, at that time, salmon fishermen were pretty crude. We were still fishing with daredevils, we didn't know how to catch salmon in deep water. Nowadays, they can catch salmon all the way to the mouth. Fishermen have really come on with advanced stuff. They've really learned how to do it. Yeah. I don't see those bull trout runs anymore, and I think a lot of it has to do with the nutrition in the system. You know, when we were putting thousands and thousands of salmon in there, that was tremendous fertilization. Yeah. And you had fertilization coming all the way from near the confluence of the middle headwater of the Salmon River, Frenchman Creek, Smiley, all those were masses of dead carcasses. Yeah. The Decker Flat was masses of dead carcasses. And I think there was just a lot of food being produced in those streams, and bull trout had it really nice. Yeah. I think we lost our bull trout run, probably some temperature warming had a little bit to it, but I think we lost our bull trout runs because we lost the salmon runs. Yeah.
You mentioned Ted Trueblood. I've heard stories about him.
Oh yeah, I tried to arrest him one time.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I was the CO, game warden at Lewiston. I was in the jet boat and I was going upriver and I went by the mouth of salmon and I got my spotting scope out and I looked way up there on the beach and here's two guys and I could see they were catching steelhead, but it was just enough. I couldn't see if they were putting them back and I thought, boy, those guys are over their limit. So I climbed this big mountain because it's the only way I could get across that they wouldn't see me. And I come down another draw through the brush and stuff, and I walked out on the bank, and I went down there, and I said, "You guys are catching a lot of fish, aren't you?" And I didn't know it was Ted, and it was the president of Evinrude Johnson Motors. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, we're catching a lot of them." And I said, well, I knew I had a ticket, you know, and I said, well, can I see him? And he said, and he called me Sonny, so I looked pretty young, you know, so he says, Sonny, we throw them all back. And they didn't have a fish, and that's the first time, you know, we always fished with big red daredevils. Okay. And he had big, nice streamer flies that he tied right on sight. That's the first time that I knew that you could catch steelhead on a fly. Oh, wow. And him and the president of Johnson Motors were steadily just catch a steelhead there right and left, and then they'd turn them loose. Wow. And so, and then I worked a lot with Ted Trueblood after that. Okay. Yeah, I got to know him real well and spent a lot of, him and I were in the Iowa Wildlife Federation. We worked on a lot of committees together and went on trips together, but he was a tremendous gentleman. Nice. Yeah, I really admired him. The first, in fact, he got me interested in fish and wildlife. And the first article I ever read that started getting me interested is the one he put in Field and Stream, the first article I've read, and it got me hooked. And I thought, you know, I need to make my living outside. Do you remember at all when they were debating should the Sawtooths be a national park or a national recreation area? Yeah, I had long talks with Ernie Day, and Bruce Bowler at that time. I wasn't up at their level. I was enough of a scientist that once in a while they'd ask me a question or two. So
Yeah.
I felt real privileged about that.
And do you think they did the right thing? That it's a national recreation area instead of a national park?
Well, it was the best alternative. I'd have liked to have seen it gone to a national park. But actually, the Forest Service has done a great job. I think at Sawtooth NRA is just about as good now as if it had been a national park. Plus, we have a little more flexibility on the hunting and fishing.